Captain Jack Moore stood on the observation deck, his weathered face reflecting in the reinforced glass as he stared at the massive warship floating in the darkness of space. The UES Sovereign drifted silently, its hull scarred from battles fought decades ago. Once the pride of Earth's fleet, it now served as little more than a floating museum piece, brought to this distant corner of the galaxy as a gesture of goodwill for the peace talks. Your species traveled in these primitive vessels. Ambassador Krulzar of the Warship Confederacy clicked his mandibles in what Jack recognized as their version of laughter. It looks like it would fall apart if struck by a micrometeor. Jack kept his face neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. The Sovereign had been his father's ship during the border wars. He'd grown up hearing stories of its legendary battles and the lives it had saved. To hear it mocked stung more than he cared to admit. The Sovereign was advanced for its time. Jack replied evenly. 30 years ago, this ship defended 3 colony worlds against overwhelming odds. The alien diplomat waved a spindly limb dismissively. Ancient history. The Krax Alliance would not be impressed by such outdated technology. Perhaps that's why they're being so difficult in the negotiations. Jack nodded but said nothing. The peace talks weren't going well. After decades of Cold War between humans and the aggressive Krax, both sides had finally agreed to meet on neutral ground. This space station orbiting an uninhabited world near the border of 3 territories. 6 days of talks had produced nothing but threats and demands. Lieutenant Amy Foster approached, her uniform crisp despite the long hours of the diplomatic mission. Captain, Admiral Wilson requests your presence at the command center. Excusing himself from the ambassador, Jack followed Amy through the bustling corridors of the station. Various alien species moved about their business, representatives from a dozen worlds who had come to witness the historic negotiations. How bad is it? Jack asked quietly. Amy's expression darkened. The Krax delegation is threatening to walk out. They're demanding mining rights to the Epsilon sector. That's 3 of our colony worlds, Jack said, frowning. Wilson can't possibly agree to that. That's not all. Our sensors detected unusual activity from the Krax vessels. They've been repositioning during the night cycle. Commander Patel thinks they're setting up for an attack formation. Jack stopped walking, pulling Amy aside into an alcove. Are you telling me they came to peace talks with battle plans? It looks that way, sir. The Admiral wanted you informed immediately because... She hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Because what, Lieutenant? Because the Sovereign is the only human military vessel in the sector. Our diplomatic cruiser is unarmed, as per the terms of the talks. Jack's mind raced through options, none of them good. The Sovereign had been gutted of most weapons and systems when it was decommissioned. It had been brought here mostly empty, with minimal life support and navigation capabilities only. The Krax brought 3 warships as their diplomatic escort, Jack muttered. We brought a museum piece. As they reached the command center, Jack could feel the tension in the air. Admiral Wilson stood surrounded by worried-looking officers, studying the holographic display of the local space. More, Wilson acknowledged him with a nod. I hope you remember how to fly that old bucket of yours. We might need it sooner than anyone expected. Jack stared at the tactical display, watching as the Krax vessels slowly encircled the station. The Sovereign hasn't fired a shot in 15 years. Admiral. Wilson's gaze was steel. Let's hope the Krax don't know that. 12 hours after the meeting with Admiral Wilson, Jack found himself back on the bridge of the Sovereign. The ship felt like a ghost town with only a skeleton crew of 15 people, all that could be spared from the diplomatic mission. The bridge lights flickered as power systems that had been dormant for years struggled to maintain full function. Status report, Jack called, settling into the captain's chair that still bore the worn imprint of his father's years of service. Main engines at 30% capacity, reported engineer Ben Hayes from his station. Life support stable but environmental systems are spotty. We've got artificial gravity on essential decks only. Communications officer Diane Garcia shook her head in frustration. Communications array is functional, but our encryption systems are outdated. The cracks will be able to break our codes in minutes if they try." Jack nodded grimly. The situation was deteriorating by the hour. The cracks delegation had officially withdrawn from talks 3 hours ago, citing human dishonesty as their reason. Their ships had moved into a clear attack pattern, though they had yet to power weapons. "What about our defensive capabilities?" Jack asked, turning to Acting Security Chief Ryan Cooper, normally a diplomatic security officer with minimal warship experience. Ryan looked up from the weapons console with a worried expression. "Sir, we've got 2 functional railguns, and maybe a dozen torpedo tubes that might work. Shield generators are operating at 20% capacity at best. If the cracks hit us with anything significant—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone on the bridge knew they were essentially sitting in a metal coffin if actual fighting broke out. The main view screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Wilson's face from the station's command center. "Captain Moore, the cracks have issued an ultimatum. They're demanding we surrender the station and all human territories within 50 light-years of the border." "That's 15 colony worlds," Jack replied, shock evident in his voice. "Millions of people." "Exactly. We have 1 hour to comply before they open fire." Wilson's expression was grim. "Most of the alien delegations are evacuating as we speak. The neutral parties want no part of this conflict." Jack leaned forward in his chair. "What are your orders, Admiral?" "Buy us time. The nearest fleet elements are 3 days away at maximum speed. The diplomatic cruiser is loading essential personnel now. Once they're clear, you're to position the Sovereign between the station and the crack ships." "Sir, with all due respect, the Sovereign can't stop 3 modern warships." Wilson's eyes hardened. "I'm not asking you to stop them, Captain. I'm asking you to make them think twice. The Sovereign's reputation might count for something. The crack's commander is young. He may only know this ship from historical records." As the Admiral signed off, Jack looked around at his nervous crew. None of them were trained for combat operations on a capital ship. Most had never even served on a warship before this mission. "Sir," called out Navigator Emma Wilson from her station, "I'm detecting power spikes from the cracks vessels. They're bringing weapons systems online ahead of their deadline." Jack stood up, straightening his uniform. "Looks like we're out of time. Lieutenant Garcia, open a channel to all crew." When she nodded that the channel was open, he continued, "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill." As warning klaxons began to sound throughout the ship, Jack gazed at the tactical display showing the approaching cracks vessels. They were sleek, modern killing machines against his outdated, half-functional Relic. "Let's show them what this old girl can still do," he murmured, more to himself than to his crew. "Bring her to life." The Sovereign moved slowly into position between the space station and the approaching cracks vessels. Jack could feel the ship struggling as ancient engines pushed the massive hull forward. On the main view screen, the 3 cracks warships grew larger, sleek predators circling their prey. "Sir, the diplomatic cruiser has cleared the station with all priority personnel," Diane reported. "Admiral Wilson is remaining behind with a skeleton crew to coordinate evacuation of remaining civilians." Jack nodded. "Maintain position. Ryan, what's our weapons status?" Ryan's fingers moved frantically across his console. "I've managed to bring 4 more torpedo tubes online. Still only 2 operational railguns. If we're lucky, we might get 1 good salvo before they overwhelm us." "We don't need to win a fight," Jack reminded him. "We just need to look like we might." The bridge fell silent as a communication request flashed on the main screen. Jack straightened his uniform and nodded to Diane. "Put it through." The alien face that appeared was vaguely reptilian. Commander Draknar of the Cracks Alliance bared his teeth in what humans had learned was not a smile but a sign of contempt. "Captain Moore," the Cracks commander hissed, "your presence is unexpected. We were told the Sovereign was merely a museum display." Jack kept his expression neutral. "The Sovereign is a fully operational warship of the Earth Fleet, Commander. I suggest you reconsider your current course of action. Drakenar's eyes narrowed. Our scans show your vessel is barely functioning. Your weapon systems are outdated and minimal. This posturing is pointless. Are you willing to bet your ships on that assessment? Jack replied calmly. The Sovereign defended the Proxima colonies against forces twice your size during the border wars. Your historical records should tell you what happened to those who underestimated her. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across the alien's features. Good, Jack thought. The Cracks respected strength above all else. You have 10 minutes to move aside, Captain, Drakenar finally said, or we will destroy your relic and everyone aboard. The screen went black. Ben called from engineering, his voice tense. Captain, I found something in the maintenance logs. There's a sealed compartment on Deck 12 that wasn't decommissioned with the rest of the weapon systems. It's marked as Reserve Defense Protocol. Jack felt a surge of hope. What's in it? Unknown, sir. It requires Captain's authorization to access. Emma, you have the bridge. Ben, meet me on Deck 12. Jack headed for the turbolift. 5 minutes later, Jack and Ben stood before a sealed door deep in the ship's interior. A dusty control panel requested voice and fingerprint authentication. Captain John Moore, authorization Sierra 97 Tango. Jack stated clearly. The panel blinked green as it scanned his fingerprint. Identity confirmed. The computer responded. Warning. Prototype defense system is classified level 10. Activation requires emergency protocols. Emergency protocols confirmed, Jack replied. Open chamber. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room filled with equipment unlike anything Jack had seen before. At its center stood what appeared to be a weapons control station connected to a massive array of power conductors. What is this? Ben whispered, examining the technology. Jack spotted a datapad on the main console and quickly skimmed its contents. His eyes widened. It's the reason the Sovereign was never completely decommissioned, he said quietly. A prototype shield and weapons system that was too unstable for mass production. My father called it the Last Stand Protocol. Ben looked concerned. Is it safe? Jack checked the time. 7 minutes until the Cracks deadline. We're about to find out. Jack's hands moved across the unfamiliar control panel, following instructions from the datapad. The Last Stand Protocol had been installed during the border wars, but never deployed in actual combat. According to the notes, it had been deemed too unpredictable for regular use. Ben, I need you to reroute power from non-essential systems, Jack ordered. This thing requires enormous energy to activate. Ben nodded and began working on a nearby engineering station, shutting down life support on unoccupied decks, diverting power from artificial gravity in cargo areas. Jack's communicator beeped. Captain, this is Emma. The Cracks ships are moving into attack formation. 4 minutes until their deadline. Understood. Stand by. Jack continued the activation sequence, feeling sweat bead on his forehead as ancient systems hummed to life around them. The datapad indicated the protocol had 3 components: an advanced shield system, a prototype energy weapon, and something called stealth field resonators. Jack had never heard of the technology before, but the specifications were impressive. Power levels at 60% and climbing, Ben reported. But the ship's power grid wasn't designed to handle this kind of load. We'll get one shot at whatever this thing does. Jack tapped his communicator. Bridge, this is the captain. Ryan, link your weapons console to Terminal Delta 9. Diane, prepare to broadcast on all frequencies when I give the word. As Ben completed the power redistribution, warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber. The ship's computer announced in a calm voice, Warning, power fluctuations detected. System overload possible. Now or never, Jack muttered, entering the final authorization code. Activating Last Stand Protocol. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship shuddered violently as dormant systems surged to life. The lights dimmed throughout the vessel before brightening again with renewed intensity. "Captain to bridge," Jack called urgently. "Status report." Emma's voice came through filled with amazement. "Sir, you need to see this. The ship is changing." Jack and Ben raced back to the bridge, having to hold on to the walls as the Sovereign continued to tremble. When they arrived, the bridge crew stood staring at the external view screens in awe. The Sovereign's hull was transforming. Panels that had appeared decorative were sliding aside to reveal weapon ports. The dull metal was now glowing with ribbons of blue energy that pulsed like veins throughout the ship's exterior. "Shields at 140% of theoretical maximum," Ryan reported incredulously. "Weapon systems I didn't even know existed are coming online. Sir, this ship is waking up." On the tactical display, Jack could see the Cracks vessels had stopped their advance. They were scanning the Sovereign, clearly confused by its transformation. "Diane, open a channel to the Cracks flagship," Jack ordered, settling into the captain's chair with newfound confidence. Commander Draknar appeared on screen, his reptilian features unable to hide his surprise. "What trickery is this? Your vessel was inactive." "I told you not to underestimate the Sovereign," Jack replied calmly. "This ship has protected humanity for generations. It carries technologies your scientists haven't even dreamed of. We detected no such capabilities when you arrived," Draknar hissed. Jack allowed himself a small smile. "That was the point, Commander. Now shall we discuss a ceasefire, or would you prefer a demonstration?" To emphasize his point, Jack nodded to Ryan, who activated one of the newly revealed weapons. A small pulse of energy shot from the Sovereign, detonating harmlessly between the vessels but creating a blinding flash that momentarily disrupted the Cracks ship's sensors. When the light faded, Draknar was staring at his own readouts with undisguised concern. For the first time since the confrontation began, the Cracks commander looked uncertain. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should return to negotiations." The ceasefire held for exactly 6 hours before the Cracks showed their true intentions. Jack had used the time wisely, working with Ben to understand the capabilities of the Last Stand protocol while evacuating remaining personnel from the station to the Sovereign. "Captain, we're detecting energy spikes from all 3 Cracks vessels," Emma reported, her voice tense. "They're charging weapons." Jack wasn't surprised. Intelligence reports had always indicated the Cracks rarely negotiated in good faith. The temporary ceasefire had simply given them time to analyze the Sovereign's unexpected capabilities and plan a coordinated attack. "All hands to battle stations," Jack ordered calmly. "Admiral Wilson, what's the status of the station evacuation?" The Admiral's tired face appeared on a side screen. "Complete. My staff and I are the last ones aboard. We'll take the final shuttle now." "Understood. We'll cover your departure." Jack turned to Ryan. "Target their lead vessel's propulsion systems. Warning shot only." Ryan nodded and locked on target. The Sovereign's weapon systems responded instantly, more smoothly than any modern ship Jack had served on. A focused beam of energy lanced out from one of the newly revealed weapon ports, passing just meters from the Cracks flagship's engines. "Sir, they're launching fighters," Diane called out. 12 small craft deploying from the second vessel. Jack studied the tactical display. The Cracks were spreading their forces, trying to surround the Sovereign. A standard tactic against a larger vessel. "Diane, send a message to Earth Command. Inform them of our situation and request immediate reinforcements." Jack turned to Ben. "What's the status of that stealth field technology?" Ben looked up from his engineering station. "Online but untested, sir. According to the specs, it doesn't make us invisible. It creates false sensor readings to confuse targeting systems." "Activated," Jack ordered. "Emma, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Ryan, defensive pattern theta." As the systems engaged, the bridge crew watched the external cameras in amazement. The Sovereign's hull seemed to shimmer, creating visual distortions that made its exact position difficult to determine. The first Cracks attack came moments later, a barrage of energy weapons from their flagship. Most shots passed harmlessly through space where the Sovereign appeared to be but wasn't. Those few that connected were absorbed by the prototype shields with minimal impact. Shields holding at 95%, Ryan reported. Their targeting systems are having trouble locking on. Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Return fire. Focus on their weapons arrays. The Sovereign responded with a devastating display of firepower. Weapons that hadn't been used in decades unleashed streams of energy that cut through the Crack's vessel's shields with surprising effectiveness. Direct hits on all targets, Ryan announced. Enemy flagship's main weapons array is disabled. The Crack's fighters altered course, abandoning their attack run to return to their motherships. On the main view screen, Jack could see the 3 Crack's vessels beginning to retreat. They're withdrawing, Emma confirmed, surprise evident in her voice. Admiral Wilson's shuttle safely cleared the station and transmitted confirmation of their escape vector. The first phase of the crisis was over, but Jack knew the Cracks would return with greater numbers. "Captain," Ben called out, his expression worried as he studied the engineering displays. "The power core is becoming unstable. These systems were experimental for a reason. We can't maintain this level of operation for long." Jack nodded grimly. "How long do we have?" "At current output, maybe 12 hours before critical systems begin to fail." Jack stared at the retreating Crack ships. 12 hours was not enough time for reinforcements to arrive from Earth. They had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. "Then we have 12 hours to find a permanent solution," Jack said firmly. "Or make these hours count." 10 hours after the Crack's retreat, the situation aboard the Sovereign had grown dire. Warning alarms blared constantly as systems throughout the ship struggled under the strain of powering the prototype technology. "Power core temperature exceeding safe parameters," Ben reported, his face illuminated by the red glow of warning indicators. "The containment field is holding, but barely." Jack studied the tactical display where 7 new Crack's vessels had appeared at the edge of sensor range. The reinforcements had arrived faster than expected, suggesting they had been waiting nearby all along. The peace talks had been a trap from the beginning. "What about the evacuees?" Jack asked, turning to Diane. "Diplomatic cruiser reports they're safely beyond Crack's sensor range," she replied. "Admiral Wilson's shuttle has docked with them. They're proceeding to the rendezvous point with Earth Fleet." Jack nodded, relieved that at least the civilians and diplomats were safe. Now he needed to focus on keeping his crew alive long enough for help to arrive. "Ben, is there any way to stabilize the power core?" Jack asked. The engineer shook his head. "Not permanently. This technology was never meant to be field deployed. But I might have a temporary solution." He pulled up schematics on his console. "If we redirect power flow through these auxiliary conduits and shut down the stealth field, we might buy another 6 hours." "Do it," Jack ordered. "Ryan, what's our weapons status?" "Main weapons at 60% capacity. Shields holding at 40%. Ryan looked up from his console. "But sir, we won't survive a concentrated attack from 7 warships." Jack knew he was right. Even at full power, the Sovereign would have been outmatched against such overwhelming force. In its current deteriorating state, direct confrontation would be suicide. Emma suddenly straightened at her station. "Captain, I've been analyzing the station we evacuated. It has a series of maintenance thrusters meant to maintain orbit. If reprogrammed, they could provide significant propulsion." Jack immediately saw where she was going. "You're suggesting we use the station itself as a weapon?" Emma nodded. "We could program the thrusters to drive it toward the Crack's formation. At minimum, it would force them to scatter. At best, it might damage or disable some of their vessels." It was a desperate plan, but they had limited options. How would we trigger it? "Someone would need to board the station and manually override the safety protocols," Emma said quietly. "The systems weren't designed for remote activation." Silence fell over the bridge as the implications became clear. Such a mission would be extremely dangerous, possibly suicidal. "I'll go," Jack decided. "Ben, you'll take command of the Sovereign." Ben started to protest, but Jack cut him off. "That's an order. The ship needs your engineering expertise more than my command experience right now." As Jack prepared to leave the bridge, the tactical alert sounded. Ryan's voice was tense as he reported, "Crack's fleet is accelerating. They'll be in weapons range in 20 minutes. Jack nodded grimly. "Prepare a shuttle. I need to move fast." 10 minutes later, Jack piloted a small maintenance shuttle toward the abandoned station. Behind him, the Sovereign's weapons charged for what might be their final stand. The ship looked majestic even in its deteriorating state, energy pulsing through its hull like a wounded warrior gathering its last strength. As he approached the station, Jack opened a channel to his ship. "Ben, once I signal that the station thrusters are programmed, pull the Sovereign back to minimum safe distance." "Understood, Captain," Ben replied. "Good luck." Jack docked with the station and moved quickly through its empty corridors. The plan was risky, but if it worked, it might just save his crew and buy time for Earth reinforcements to arrive. Behind him, the Crack's fleet continued its advance, weapons primed to destroy the human warship they had once mockingly called a relic. Jack moved swiftly through the abandoned station's corridors, following Emma's directions through his communicator. Emergency lights cast long shadows as he made his way to the central control room. "The Crack's fleet has entered weapons range," Ben's voice reported in his ear. "They're holding position just outside our firing solution. Looks like they're being cautious after our last encounter." "Good," Jack replied, reaching the station's control center. "That buys me time." The control room was eerily silent, screens still displaying data from the evacuated diplomatic mission. Jack moved to the propulsion control console and began entering commands. "Emma, I'm at the controls. Talk me through the override sequence." Emma's calm voice guided him through the complex process of reprogramming the station's maintenance thrusters. These small engines were designed only to make minor orbital adjustments, but all firing simultaneously toward the Crack's fleet could turn the massive station into a formidable projectile. "Sir, you'll need to disable 5 safety protocols," Emma explained. "Each requires command-level authorization." As Jack worked, the station shuddered violently. "What was that?" he demanded. "The Cracks just fired on the station," Ryan reported. "They figured out what we're doing. 3 of their vessels are breaking formation to target you directly." Jack worked faster, fingers flying across the controls. "Ben, can you provide any covering fire?" "Negative, Captain. If we fire now, all 7 ships will focus on the Sovereign. We're barely holding together as it is." Another impact rocked the station, throwing Jack against the console. Warning lights flashed as sections of the structure began losing pressure. 4 safety protocols overridden, Jack muttered. 1 to go. The final override required physical activation of 2 widely separated control panels. Jack cursed under his breath as he realized the implications. The system had been designed to prevent exactly what he was attempting. "Captain," Ben's voice came urgently through the communicator. "The power core is reaching critical levels. We have maybe 15 minutes before catastrophic failure." Jack made a quick decision. "Ben, bring the Sovereign alongside the station, opposite side from the Cracks. I need you to fire on these coordinates when I give the signal." He transmitted the location of the second control panel. "Sir, that's inside the station," Ryan protested. "Exactly. 1 precise shot should activate the panel remotely." It was a desperate gamble, but there was no time for anything else. Jack positioned himself at the primary control panel and waited as the Sovereign maneuvered into position. "In position, Captain," Ben confirmed. "But we'll only get 1 shot before the Cracks target us." "Make it count," Jack replied. "Fire on my mark." The station rocked again as Cracks' weapons found their target. Alarms blared warning of structural failures throughout the facility. "Now," Jack shouted, activating his panel. The Sovereign fired a precise beam that cut through the station's hull, striking the second control panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire station hummed as thrusters designed never to fire simultaneously began powering up. "It's working," Jack reported. "Station is on trajectory toward the Cracks fleet. Impact in 3 minutes." "Captain, get out now," Ben urged. "Docking Bay 3 is still intact." Jack didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted through the deteriorating station as systems failed around him. Sections began decompressing, emergency bulkheads slamming shut behind him as he ran. He reached the shuttle with seconds to spare, launching just as the station's thrusters reached full power. The massive structure lurched forward, accelerating toward the surprised Cracks fleet. The enemy vessels attempted to scatter, but 2 were too slow. The station collided with them in a spectacular explosion that damaged 3 other Cracks ships caught in the blast radius. As Jack piloted his shuttle back to the Sovereign, he watched the remaining Cracks vessels retreat, clearly unwilling to continue the fight against an enemy who would sacrifice a space station as a weapon. "Earth fleet reports they're 6 hours out, Captain." Diane's relieved voice came through as he docked. "The Cracks are withdrawing from the entire sector." Jack allowed himself a smile as he returned to the bridge. The Sovereign might be failing, but she had done her job. The old warship had proven that even relics could roar one last time.